In the series of The Penguin, we see 10 episodes of how Oswald Cobblepot goes from being an average criminal to Gotham's crime boss, representing the Penguin we have seen in the comics. The process of how he went from cab driver to in charge of Gotham's underground criminal world wasn't by accident, and today I'll be looking at the steps Oz took from going from a simple cab driver to running a criminal organisation. So the first thing Oz did in his career was started working for the Falcone family as a cab driver. This is very important because he obviously didn't start off in a higher position or even as a criminal at all, but probably at the lowest style of job he could find, working as a cab driver for the Falcone family. Even when he was a cab driver, Oz always knew he wanted more, so this was always seen as a temporary thing for him. What this did for Oz was it gave him a way to get into the family and also allowed him to observe how the family ran its operations. It wasn't the fact of what he was doing as an actual job was doing much, it was more so the fact of who he was doing it for gave him a foothold into the family so he could eventually work his way up. You even see when he starts doing favours for Carmine. You see little things like he starts wearing nicer suits. He was invited into the family home and normally he would wait outside in the car. First thing he did was make sure he got some sort of a job into the family, and then from there he could work his way up by building trust, building relationships, carrying out deeds for the other people that were higher up in the organisation, and that's exactly what he did. So the second thing he did once he was in the organisation was then really suck up to the bosses of the crime family. He did his best to try and make them happy, try and build trust, do anything that they obviously said to him, make sure he was actually good at his job and was very observant as a driver. And over time, he eventually started moving higher up in the criminal hierarchy. This means that in a relatively short amount of time, Oz went from being the driver of the family to being what I like to describe as a mid-tier boss. Meaning he's got a strong position within the criminal family now. He has people working for him. He's got a lot of power and responsibility within that family, but it's still not on the higher end of the spectrum, and he still has to work for a lot of people and essentially do what he's told. The third step, which kind of links into step 2, was that at this stage he started to build his own money, career, allies and power. So even though everything so far had technically been given to him by the criminal family, he'd actually start to put in a lot of systems and things in place for him personally. He actually started to hire a lot of people that just purely worked for himself, and an example of this is Vic. Obviously throughout the season we see Vic really help Oz from, assisting him in business activities but also saving his life multiple times, and Vic worked directly for Oz, which was really important because a lot of people that were in the gang were working for Oz were people that were probably in the gang before Oz was even a boss or managing them. So for Oz to then go and recruit his own people that worked directly for him, that trust him, gave him a bit of independence where even if he left the organisation he was in, he would still have employees, power, and be redeemed at a certain level. A few other details I think Oz did at this stage was made sure he had systems such as multiple vehicles, security on where he lived, people he could use as an alibi such as Eve, and this all helped in terms of the security process. If he did ever break away from the family he's in, he just had a bit of insurance that he could stay safe, he still had his own money and his own employees. This step was more about getting that bit of independence back from always working from someone else. Step 4 was that he then started to use his enemies. Once Oz got in a comfortable position where he had enough money and power, where he feels like he can probably take over the Falcone criminal empire now, he decided to put a strategy in place to partner with the enemies, which were the Maronis, to get rid of the Falcone family. He did this by essentially starting a war between the two, using leverage he had on both sides of the family. His plan wasn't so much to make an alliance with the Maronis, but more so that both the gangs would take each other out, and he would be the one that remained after all. This plan wasn't smooth, but it definitely highlighted the fact of, but in the criminal world, if you did want to get rid of the higher people in the organisation, partnering with the opposition was probably the best way to go, and this is what Oz definitely did. Obviously, in episode 4, you do actually see the Maronis find out that Oz was just playing them as well, and it did start some big war, but he had the right idea. I think one thing that was important with this step was when he actually approached the Maronis, he already had leverage on them, that he had killed Alberto, and wanted them to take the credit for it, to improve the Maronis' street cred, and I think this idea of leverage was very important for Oz. The fifth step that he did was essentially take out everyone himself, pretty much like a masker style. He made a lot of enemies at the top, so his only option really was to get rid of them by killing them, or put them in prison like he did to Sophia, to completely remove everyone, and then Oz had that fresh sheet where he could jump in and take control of the criminal empire, and that's exactly what he did. The last thing Oz did, which was step 6, was tie up any loose ends. An example of how he did this was him killing Vic. Vic knew a lot about Oz, and Oz coming from a background where he started off working and then took over his boss's business. Oz didn't want Vic to have the option to do this, so Oz made a decision to take out Vic, which was a very brutal killing. But this was literally just to tie up any loose ends so nothing could be a threat to him within his own organisation moving forward. And there were 6 steps that Oz took to go from being a cab driver, which admittedly we didn't see much of, it was just flashbacks in the series, to then being the criminal boss.